Hello everyone, welcome. What I want to do today is take you through something that sits right at the intersection of what you'll actually do as library professionals and what the research is telling us about why it matters. We're talking about physical space, learning space, the question of what a library is for in the 21st century, and more practically, how we design it, evaluate it, and keep it relevant. We're drawing on 6 articles published between 2010 and 2022, so this is a fairly compressed but rich snapshot of where the field has been and where it's heading. By the end, I want you to walk away with a clear framework for thinking about library space, not just as an aesthetic or logistical problem, but as a deeply user-centered, evidence-driven challenge. Let me start with what might seem like an obvious question. Why does any of this matter? Academic libraries have been in a kind of identity negotiation for about 30 years. The collections argument that the library is where knowledge lives has been complicated enormously by digitization. Students don't need to come to the library to access a journal article anymore. So the question becomes, what do they come for, and what should they come for? Head, writing in 2016, captures the problem bluntly. She describes the old model, the silent, stack-filled monument, as completely unsuited to the teaching, researching, and learning needs of the digital age. That's a strong statement from someone who studied dozens of real renovation projects across the country. But here's what's important to understand. This isn't just an architectural question. The shift in how we think about library space reflects deeper shifts in pedagogy, the move toward constructivism, active learning, collaborative inquiry. It also reflects demographic shifts. Students at many institutions are majority first generation, majority commuter. The library isn't just a study hall. It may be the primary place they have to be on campus between classes. So the stakes here are real. And as practitioners, your decisions about space will directly shape whether students succeed or struggle. To understand where we are, we have to understand where we came from. Sullivan's 2010 literature review and Head's 2016 report both trace the same arc, and it's worth walking through it carefully because the terminology still matters when you're in conversations with administrators, architects, and faculty. The first major wave of transformation happened in the 1990s. This is when the information commons emerged. The concept was essentially a response to the IT revolution. Libraries began building spaces organized around access to digital resources. Think computer clusters with reference librarians nearby. The key innovation wasn't the computers themselves, it was the service model, cross-trained staff, integrated computing and research assistance, the library as a point of convergence rather than just a collection. This was genuinely significant because it reframed the library as a service institution, not just a storage institution. That philosophical shift, small as it might seem in retrospect, laid the groundwork for everything that followed. The second phase, the learning commons, emerged in the early 2000s and is still the dominant model you'll encounter in practice today. The learning commons goes further than the information commons in a fundamental way. It's not just about access to technology. It's about all the ways learning can happen inside the library. Flexible furniture, collaborative spaces, group study rooms alongside individual carrels, writing centers, tutoring services, and IT support all co-located within the library. Sullivan articulates what made this model powerful, the variety of teaching and learning relationships a single space could support. A student can arrive, study alone for an hour, move to a group table to work on a project, consult a writing tutor, and then sit in a comfortable chair and just read, all within the same building. That breadth of function is genuinely new. Now, Turner and colleagues, writing in 2013, make a point worth pausing on. The terminology proliferated wildly during this period. Information hub, cybrary, knowledge commons, learning space. Institutions were labeling their spaces differently and sometimes inconsistently. Turner's conclusion, and I think this is wise, is that the label matters less than the philosophy. Features and purpose are what define a space, not what you call it on the building directory. By the 2000s, a third vocabulary was emerging, library learning spaces, and this is where we are now. Head's 2016 study is particularly useful here because she's talking to the people who actually built these spaces: librarians, architects, and consultants. What she found was a shared commitment to what she calls a paradigm shift, away from the library as a monument toward the library as what several of her interviewees called the campus living room. Welcoming, warm, safe for both formal and informal learning. The progression, information commons to learning spaces, is not just historical trivia. It represents a genuine deepening of the library's mission. Each iteration became more flexible, more user-defined, more integrated with the full educational life of a campus. What's critical for practitioners is Head's phrase: library space design is a moving target. There are no hard and fast rules. What works at a research university in 2010 may not work at a community college in 2025. The best designers and library directors understand this and build adaptability into the fabric of the space itself. This is where the research gets especially important, and, I'll be honest, somewhat surprising. Hegde and her colleagues at Texas State University did something methodologically clever in 2018. They surveyed 199 students and faculty about their ideal study and work environments, but they deliberately removed the concept of library from the survey instrument. The goal was to get at generalized preferences about space, unconstrained by assumptions about what a library should be. What did they find? 85% of respondents preferred to study or work alone, often or always. Only 21% worked collaboratively with some regularity. Faculty were even more solitary. 68% said they never work in a social or group setting. Think about what that means for a field that has spent the last 15 years building collaborative social learning spaces. We may have overcorrected. Now, this doesn't mean collaborative spaces are wrong. When students do work in groups, they want well-equipped rooms with good technology. But the dominant pattern, the one that drives daily library use, is individual, focused, quiet work. Homework, writing, research. The unglamorous, solitary grind of academic learning. As practitioners, the lesson is this: design for what users actually do, not for what we assume or hope they do. The same survey asked participants to describe their best and worst study experiences in their own words. The results are striking in their consistency. The number one attribute of a great study space: quiet. The number one attribute of a terrible study space: noise. This is not a coincidence, it's a signal. Other top attributes of a great space: privacy, resources like chargers and Wi-Fi, the ability to focus without interruption, comfortable furniture, and adequate workspace to spread out materials. Across all three work modes, alone, in a group, and alone in a social setting, three attributes consistently scored highest: charging stations, varied seating options, and natural light. These are the baseline expectations of contemporary library users. If your space doesn't reliably offer all three, you're behind. The bottom of the desirability rankings is equally instructive. Working out in the open and background noise were consistently rated lowest, especially by faculty. Students sometimes tolerate, even prefer, a certain level of ambient noise. But the general pattern is clear. Exposure and noise are barriers. Beyond the functional basics, the survey asked something more aspirational. What makes a space inspiring to work in? The top answer, with 58 mentions, was daylight and natural light. Second was light and lighting in general. Third was access to nature, outdoor views, plants, water features. Fourth was color. This is not mere aesthetics. There's solid research linking light quality to biological rhythms, attention, and cognitive performance. Daylight in classrooms and offices improves productivity and test performance. Access to nature, even simulated through window views, artwork, or indoor plants, reduces cognitive fatigue and supports concentration. What respondents said about color is also telling. They wanted brightness, warmth, and energy, and they specifically rejected what one person called institutional white. That flat, fluorescent, nothing color that signals bureaucracy rather than learning. The practical takeaway is that atmosphere matters as much as square footage. A renovated space with the same floor plan but better lighting, warmer colors, and a window view to greenery will perform better, and users will feel better working in it. That's not a soft claim, it's empirically supported. Peng and colleagues, writing in 2022, give us the most systematic quantitative picture of what design elements actually influence user behavior in library spaces. Their study surveyed 428 users across two university libraries in Wuhan, China. And while the cultural context differs from North America, the findings resonate across the literature. They identified 7 major categories of design elements, including physical environment, interior decoration, service facilities, space diversity, furniture, spatial accessibility, and digital integration. What's statistically significant, and this is important, is that physical comfort and acoustic comfort were the two variables most strongly correlated with both how frequently users visited the library and how long they stayed when they did. Not the technology, not the furniture variety, physical comfort and acoustics. Their recommendation is direct. If you're prioritizing renovations with limited budget, start with physical comfort and acoustic quality. Everything else matters, but these two have the strongest evidence behind them. Let me stay with acoustics for a moment because it comes up in every single study we're looking at today, and it is genuinely complex in practice. Hegde's survey tells us noise is the top complaint. Peng tells us acoustics predict visit behavior. Dufresne and colleagues, also writing in 2022, note that when libraries built bustling learning commons, they created a direct acoustic tension with the quieter adjacent library spaces. Two very different sonic environments sitting side by side. Here's the nuance. Users are not uniformly asking for silence. Faculty often are. Graduate students are more tolerant of ambient noise and may actually find white noise helpful for concentration. Undergraduates are somewhere in between. And this matters because your library serves all of them simultaneously. The solution that emerges from the literature is acoustic zoning, deliberately designing distinct areas with different noise profiles. A silent zone with clear signage and enforcement. A quiet zone where whispered conversation is acceptable. A collaborative zone where groups can work. A social zone, perhaps near a cafe, where conversation is the norm. This is not a luxury. It is the minimum acceptable design standard for a contemporary academic library, and it requires both architectural decisions and policy decisions. The physical space and the rules about how it's used have to work together. Dufresne, Thuygerson, and Hong's 2022 study asks a question that I think is going to become increasingly central to library practice. If we're not the only game in town anymore, what exactly is our game? Here's the context. When libraries built learning commons in the 2010 and gate counts soared, other campus units noticed. Student unions were renovated. Academic buildings added collaborative zones. Residence halls built study spaces. The campus became saturated with informal learning spaces that all look roughly the same. Comfortable furniture, good Wi-Fi, collaborative tables, maybe a coffee option nearby. Dufresne's team studied 5 different campus locations at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln using observations, surveys, and focus groups. What they found was that the academic library is still prominently and distinctively situated within this ecosystem, but its relationship to other spaces matters. Students navigate these spaces strategically. They choose based on task type, social context, and what kind of cognitive state they want to be in. The implication for practitioners is significant. You cannot design a library space without knowing what else is available on your campus. Your competitive advantage, if we can use that term, lies in what you offer that a student union or a coffee shop cannot. That means library expertise, research support, specialized technology, and curated quiet. Those are your differentiators. Lean into them. One of the most important intellectual moves in this literature is to stop treating quiet and social as opposites that you have to choose between. The field overcorrected. The shift from silent stacks to collaborative commons was valuable, but it went too far in dismissing quiet space as obsolete. Dufresne's team noted explicitly that the assumption students primarily need social spaces led to a devaluing of quiet space that the evidence does not support. Users, as we've seen, predominantly want individual, quiet work environments. What the best contemporary library design offers is a spectrum, and Hegde's team provides a nice way of thinking about this spectrum, from makerspaces and active learning environments at one end, through collaborative rooms and semi-private alcoves, all the way to fully silent individual zones at the other end, with the highest demand sitting firmly at the quiet end. Their metaphor is one I find genuinely useful. Stop designing libraries like a single large fast food restaurant, uniform, inflexible, and noisy. Think instead of a series of boutique spaces, each with a distinct atmosphere calibrated to a specific kind of work and learning. That's not just better design, it's a more honest account of human cognitive diversity. Head's 2016 report is perhaps the most practically useful source in our set because it's grounded in real projects. She interviewed the people who actually planned and built these spaces. A few things stand out. The most successful projects started not with aesthetics or floor plans, but with a clear articulation of learning goals. What do we want students to be able to do in this space? That question, answered rigorously and collaboratively, drives every subsequent decision. Second, the best projects included genuine stakeholder diversity, not just librarians and administrators, but students, faculty, architects, and library consultants who could translate between professional vocabularies. Librarians and architects, it turns out, do not naturally speak the same language, and when that communication fails, projects fail with it. Third, and this is the finding that should concern all of us, the evaluation gap is enormous. Most projects ended when the ribbon was cut. Gate counts went up and success was declared. But almost nobody systematically asked, are students learning better? Are they staying enrolled? A handful of institutions were beginning to correlate library space use with GPA and retention. And that's exactly the kind of evidence the field needs to build. As practitioners, you should be pushing for post-occupancy evaluation as a standard practice, not an afterthought. If you pull back from the individual studies, 5 themes run through all of them with remarkable consistency. The first is evolutionary continuity. Library space has changed in phases: stacks, information commons, learning spaces, but each phase built on the previous one. Understanding this history protects you from reinventing the wheel and helps you make the case for change to skeptical stakeholders. The second is user-centeredness. Every study that generated empirical data, Hegde, Peng, Dufresne, started by asking users what they actually experience and need, not what administrators assumed they needed. This is a discipline, and it requires humility. The third is environmental quality. Acoustics, light, thermal comfort, color. These are not secondary concerns. They are primary drivers of whether users come to your library and whether they stay. The physical environment is part of the service. The fourth is ecosystem thinking. Your library does not exist in a vacuum. It sits within a campus, a community, a set of competing and complementary spaces. Design and policy decisions have to account for that context. And the fifth is assessment accountability. The field has relied for too long on gate counts as a proxy for impact. We need richer metrics tied to actual learning outcomes. One thing worth appreciating about this body of literature is how methodologically varied it is, and why that variety is a strength. Sullivan and Turner give us literature reviews, broad synthesis that establishes historical context and theoretical frameworks. Head gives us qualitative interview data, the rich, grounded perspectives of people doing the work. Hegde gives us survey data analyzed with non-parametric statistics, telling us what users prefer across different demographic groups. Dufresne combines observation, surveys, and focus groups at multiple sites, a genuinely mixed methods design. Peng uses quantitative surveys with logistic regression and factor analysis to identify statistically significant predictors of behavior. No single method here tells the full story. That's the point. Understanding library space requires seeing it from multiple angles simultaneously. What users say, what users do, what the patterns look like in aggregate, and what the experience feels like in context. As you design your own research and assessment projects in practice, this is the model. Triangulate. Don't rely on a single survey or a single week of observation. Build evidence across methods. Let me bring this together. What the literature tells us with reasonable confidence is this. Most library users, most of the time, want to work quietly and alone. They need reliable technology, physical comfort, good light, and acoustic privacy. The physical environment, particularly sound and comfort, is a statistically significant predictor of whether they come and how long they stay. And the library space cannot be understood or designed without reference to the broader campus context. What the field still needs is a genuine commitment to post-occupancy evaluation. We need to move beyond gate counts. We need to understand whether these investments in space are translating into student success, retention, academic performance, a sense of belonging on campus. We also need to get better at designing for the full diversity of our users. First-generation students may have different space needs than graduate students. International students may relate to library space differently. Students with disabilities need more than ADA compliance. They need spaces that are genuinely comfortable and functional for them. And we need to stay honest about the relationship between physical and virtual space. The pandemic demonstrated that digital environments can partially substitute for physical ones. But students came back. They came back because there's something about being in a well-designed library, surrounded by other people working with good light and quiet and resources at hand, that virtual space cannot replicate. The best library learning spaces don't choose between silence and sociability, tradition and innovation, technology and comfort. They make room for all of it, because the diversity of human learning demands nothing less.